One of my favorite ways to encourage my kids' curiosity is through Science Kid Podcasts. And today's episode is all about a fabulous kid podcast all about science called Tumble. I'm Andy Smiley, the Friendly Podcast Guide. I'm a mom who has used podcasts to fight the boredom and loneliness of motherhood, and now I want to help you find a podcast that can do the same thing for you. It can be overwhelming to try and find a podcast you'll enjoy in the thousands of shows that are out there. That's where I come in. My episodes are short and they answer all of the questions you'll have about the podcast, so you'll know if it's a good fit for you or not. I'm here to help you find a podcast you'll love without wasting your time. Now, let's talk podcasts. Hosts Lindsay and Marshall describe the show like this: exploring stories of science discovery. Tumble is a science podcast created to be enjoyed by the entire family. The length of each episode is about 20 minutes. Before we learn more about the vibe of Tumble, we're going to take a quick break to talk about my guide to kid podcasts. One of my favorite parenting tools is kid podcasts. I use them when I'm running errands with the kiddos to keep them from complaining the whole time, or when I need a mom break, I'll just grab an easy activity like coloring pages or a sensory bin, turn on a kid podcast, and the kids will be entertained for at least half an hour. I know that kid podcasts would help you in your life too, which is why I made a guide to kid podcasts. There are 8 categories ranging from science to mindfulness to audio drama, with at least 3 podcasts in each category. There are 27 podcasts in total on the guide. I've listened to each of the podcasts, so I can attest to them being kid-friendly. And I put my email at the bottom of the guide so that if you try a couple with your kids and none of them are a good fit, you can email me and I will personally help you find a kid podcast that works for your littles and you. You can grab this guide at the link in the show notes. Now we get to hear from Lindsay and Marshall as they talk about the vibe of the show as described by their listeners. Marshall and Lindsay, I am so excited to talk to you about your kid podcast, Tumble. But before we dive in, can you introduce yourself a little bit to my listeners?
Yeah, I'm Marshall, and my main thing is that I'm married to Lindsay. My secondary thing is that prior to working on this podcast, I was a teacher for 17 years, kind of bouncing around all sorts of subjects, but mostly spending my time teaching music. And as a result, I do all the music and the goofy teacher jokes for the podcast.
And the goofy dad jokes. He does it all.
Yeah, I do everything within the very narrow range of jokes that teachers or dads would tell.
I bet there's a lot of overlap.
It's like the Venn diagram is just a single circle, honestly.
And I'm Lindsay, and my background is in science journalism and audio reporting, and I am one of the co-hosts for Tumble Science Podcast for Kids. I get to do all the interviewing of scientists and writing the show.
That is so fun. So we're going to dive right in. Why did you start Tumble? Why did you start this podcast for kids?
Yeah, so like I said, my background is in science reporting, but I really did not like science when I was growing up in school. I just thought it was a collection of facts, something I had to memorize, like those bold-faced words in a textbook, and just kind of get a good enough grade to go on. And I never really understood that science didn't have all the answers to every question about the Earth and the universe until after I had graduated from college and I was working in journalism and got the chance to interview a scientist, in which I found out that scientists were working on issues, solving issues that I cared about, through, using science as a lens to solve problems. And it was actually a human process. There were indeed still things we did not know about the world, and it was actually relevant to my life. That's something I never understood in so many years of schooling, and I saw that as just a gigantic disconnect and disservice, because science is, all around us every day, has a huge influence on our daily lives, and our future and the kind of future that we want to grow up in. And that's especially important for kids to understand. So that is sort of what is at the base of Tumble. Just, improving science literacy for the next generation. And to do that, we just try to tell the most fun and interesting stories about real scientists working research and really humanize the scientists that are telling the stories, that it's not, science is up on a pedestal of, particular geniuses in the past, that science is a process that's going on right now, and it's done by normal, everyday people who have lives.
I love that.
Yeah.
So I feel like we've touched on a lot of different things that you probably want people to get out of your show, but is there one or two like main things that you want kids and their parents to get out of Tumble?
So I think like one or two things that we really want people to get out of the show. I think, one is when the show is over, for them to like keep talking as a family, just like whatever it is, whatever the topic is, to just like keep thinking about it and keep exploring, if it's interesting to you, like what more can we find out about this? I think that's one big thing. And then another thing is just the idea that science is like an ongoing process, that it's, whatever we have on our show is just what we know right now, and it's constantly changing, and it's more about, using experimentation and observation and things like that to discover more about the universe. It's not, here's all the facts, boom, in that big book that you just like thump on the table. And it's like, if you memorize this book, science, and then there's a test at the end of the semester. Like, I think we really want to drive home that message that it's really something, it's really more important to understand the process than it is to understand any particular detail about, like what Niels Bohr discovered about the atom or whatever. Like, yeah.
And I think we're also widening that to understand how science works in the world, how science influences society, and, how the decisions that are being made now will affect the future, because there are so many ways that science can help solve problems, but it can also cause problems. So how do you think about that? How do you develop the critical thinking skills to not just be like, oh, anything science is good or anything science is bad, but really have an understanding of the decision making that results in outcomes of good or bad or everything in between? Because we are living in a very complex world. Kids are growing up to inherit that complex world, and they need to have the skills to understand it in the same ways that we need the skills to understand, reading the news every day. It's a topic of literacy, really.
It's also important to know that some animals only have a butt sometimes.
Yeah.
That's another key takeaway.
And it's just something that can enrich your life.
I completely agree. How would you describe the vibe of your show?
The vibe.
They're good vibes.
Yeah. Good vibes. Well, I was actually talking to someone, while I was like hanging out watching my son do soccer practice, because that's what I do now. Who had listened to the show, and they were like, "So do you guys like have fun when you're recording? Because it really sounds like you're having a great time." And I was like, yeah, we do. So I think that sums it up in a nutshell. Just sounds like you're having a great time.
Yeah, we cover, silly and serious topics, and we try to bring a lot of levity to whatever we're talking about, so that, it's just something that's pleasurable to listen to. Like, even when I listen back to old episodes, like, I have a smile on my face the whole time. Like, that's when I think I know that we've hit it. Our target is just like when I'm smiling, when I'm laughing.
That is so fun. Okay, well, later I'm going to be asking you what your favorite episode is. But first, can you tell me where can people find you so that I can put it all in the show notes and people can go directly wherever they want to go to find you?
Sure. I mean, wherever you get podcasts. And then we also have a website, sciencepodcastforkids.com.
Yeah, so just search for Tumble Science Podcast for Kids, and our logo, it has a magnifying glass on it in a blue background. So that's how you'll know you find us. We also have Tumble in Espanol, so that has adaptations of, I think we're getting up to 10 or 11 so far. We're still on our season there. If you want to listen.
If you want to listen in Spanish, or, we offer transcripts in, episodes that are both in English and in Spanish, where you can practice your Spanish learning if that's what you want to do.
And I'm really grateful that you do it, because I feel like having more than just English kid podcasts out there is essential, because not all kids speak English. So thank you for doing that. And okay, now we're back to your favorite episode. So if both of you will give your favorite episode, that would be wonderful. So I can link those in the show notes too.
Yeah, it's almost like the last thing I worked on is my favorite thing. Or the last thing I heard is my favorite thing, because we just did a rebroadcast called "Why Do Cats Purr?" And it was such a journey for me to study find cat purr scientists, and it's a startlingly difficult question. So I had to find 3 experts rather than like our normal. We like to feature one expert, and went on like a full cat purr exploration, ending up with the proprietor of the website purring.org, who is a real character.
I'm sure.
And it just like gets at like both the nature of science, the limitations of science, because it is very hard to study cats. Like, they're all around us, but like they are just impossible to like get to do anything. and there's no consensus on why cats make this like very signature sound. And also like why other species of cats roar. Like, they can't do both. You either purr or you roar. And it's just full of like funny stories about people studying cats, interacting with cats, and just like ultimately throwing up their hands and being like, we don't know.
I give up. Cats.
Cats win. Cats win.
It'll remain a mystery. I guess here's some tuna fish. Fine.
We still love you, even though you're very frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would say mine is still my crowning achievement remains the dinosaur asteroid episode. Or maybe not crowning achievement, but for that episode, like right before it came out, I had listened to an episode of the podcast 20,000 Hertz, which is all about sound design and engineering and all that stuff. And it was about the sounds from Star Wars and how those sounds were collected. So I was listening to that and I was like, maybe this episode about the dinosaur asteroid is an opportunity to like try doing that. And then so I did. And, we had the sequence where Lindsay's explaining,
sort of the last day of the dinosaurs.
Yeah, the asteroid, that like what happened to it in space, and then when it landed, and I just spent way too much time kind of creating that in sound, and it wound up being this like exercise for me that then now for every episode I do a little bit of that we've made since then. I haven't done anything that intensive really since, but it's been part of the deal.
Yeah. And I want to note, he had children like dropping boxes of Legos to create those sounds.
Yeah.
But I will say though, like, we love all of the episodes, and We've been doing this for 7-8 years now, and we're still creatively excited about it and feel like we're very much in an ongoing evolution of the show, the topics that we cover, the messages that we're trying to raise are very dynamic, like with, how our society has changed so much over the past 8 years. And so I feel like, there's always something fresh, and that kids often go back and listen to the entire series, which is incredible. But that, like, we still have an infinite amount to say and to write about and to joke about, and more puns to be made for sure.
Oh my goodness. That's good to know. And I'm glad, because I'm sure as soon as my listeners, just like me, start listening, they're going to be like, yeah, don't stop. We want more. We need more dad/teacher jokes.
There's no upper limit.
Oh, good. I like to ask kid podcast hosts, like, what's the age range for like your target kid audience, so that my listeners can know and I can know who to best recommend, like which kids need this the most or will love it the most.
Yeah. Well, in my head, as someone who spent a lot of time hanging out with kids, I'm always imagining that we're talking to a fourth grader.
Okay.
But our audience range goes from 3 to 13, and I think people at either end of that spectrum still get something out of the show.
I'll add childless adults also have reported enjoying the show.
Some childless adults have told us they like it too, and science teachers. So,
sure,
yeah,
that's awesome.
So, 3 to 13, the 3-year-old, a lot of things are going to be flying over their head. And the 13, like some 13-year-olds, if they're the kind of 13-year-old who like cares about being cool, like that might be, they might not be into it, but
sure.
Everybody else, I think, will enjoy it.
Yeah, it's really for the whole family.
Fabulous. Okay, is there anything else that you want to add that we haven't touched on yet?
I will promote that we are going to be coming out with an audio course, a free audio course soon. It is about discovering the size of the universe, and it's really creative. It's a little bit different from what you'll hear on the podcast, but it also has materials that go along with it so that kids can become sky watchers as they hear about stories of astronomers from the past.
That is awesome. Will you make sure to send me a link to that so I can put it in the show notes? Because I'm sure that all of my listeners are going to want to dive into that with their kids.
It will be out by the time that your podcast comes out.
Fabulous. Perfect. Well, this has been an absolute delight. I cannot wait to introduce all of my listeners to both of you, to Tumble. I really like your podcast. We really like science podcasts in our family right now. I don't know what it is, but my kids, any kid podcast that's about science, they are all over it. So thank you for making this podcast and doing what you do. I am so grateful.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you know someone or a family who could use Tumble in their life, will you share this episode with them? Also, if you want to learn about more kid podcasts, grab my kid podcast guide. Talk to you soon.
Whenever we get a kid question from a scientist, there's always 2 questions we follow up with, which is, what do you think the answer to that question is, and how do you think scientists would find out? So, like, they'll always come up with, like, what would be the experiment? And sometimes it's just like, I don't know, they'd have some science machines. But
a lot of times they come up with some wild ideas, and also ideas that it's like, wow, you understand this.
Yeah.